Hi, good afternoon. You are watching a Canvas Live event. Canvas Live sessions are presented by the Canvas community members and or instructor employees to help Canvas users improve and enhance their teaching and learning with Canvas. Today we have our community member, Nicolina Wilson. Nicolina, I am excited to hear what you have to say today. We have a lot of interesting thoughts to learn from you, so I will just hand it over to you. Welcome to Canvas Live.
Thank you so much. My name is Nicolina Wilson, as she said. I work for Seminole County Public Schools. I'm an ePathways Innovation Specialist. So I've had a whole lot of exciting things that I've gotten to be a part of in my school district. I work on a bunch of new projects that we have going on, and my main job is to help our schools be much more future ready and preparing our students for tomorrow's workforce and the world that in the future that's ahead of them. So I'm excited to share with you some of our tactics and strategies for engaging students in the K-12 community, in the K-12 classroom. And I hope you guys are having a great summer so far from different places. I know you're probably coming up on summer if you're in different places around the US, but I'm excited to present to you this 3-part series about engaging K-12 students. I've been doing PD for about 6 years now in our district, and I've learned a lot from teachers about what they can do to tangibly take back to their classrooms right away, and the kind of things that they want to talk about and discuss in the summer so that they can prepare for next year's learning. So I'm excited to share that information with you and help you with that. That being said, I do want to make this a two-way conversation, so if there are some of you watching right now that want to participate in the live chat, I have a live chat window open with the YouTube link that this is being broadcasted at. So feel free to participate in that live chat, and I will try to answer your questions and integrate your comments into this webinar. So the first of the Engage K-12 students seminars is about activating learning for students. And I wrote a blog about how do we engage today's K-12 student. And as we know, students today really do need a different style of learning, a more active, more participatory learning that it's not as easy to engage these kinds of students today. They need something different to be successful in wherever their future is going to take them. And a lot of times in today's education system, we lose sight of the fact that engaging lessons, that creating really meaningful and engaging and active lessons impact positively all the other aspects of school that we try to fix, behavior and attendance and learning and student achievement. All of it can be affected and impacted positively by truly engaging active lessons. And so I just want you guys to think about that as we're starting to talk about this today and engaging on this series. So when you think about it, I want you to think about the word learning and what learning is to you. What is learning? When you think of learning, what do you see? Do you see this? I see this in a lot of our classrooms, whether the students are actually taking a nap or they're just have their heads down because they're working on something silently. Look at the kid in the back. He's absolutely bored of whatever it is. But that doesn't look like truly active learning to me. Learning looks like, it looks like people talking. It looks like, I've heard organized chaos when I've answered that question. It looks like students thinking hard and exploring and engaging in content, engaging in critical thinking and problem solving. It doesn't look like this. And there are a lot of our classrooms that look like this. But this classroom was designed for the factory model of education. And is it really preparing our students for what their future is? I know that either, those of us watching have had classrooms that look like this. Maybe there are still classrooms in your schools that look like this. I know I went to class with these desks where your hair got caught in the chair on those little silver knobs and, but how many schools are still looking like this where they're doing the prescribed curriculum And the teachers could be robots basically spilling out what is on their note cards, sitting in these desks. And the kids, they look like this, or maybe you teach older kids and they look like this. But it doesn't have to. We can do engaging, exciting things to activate learning for our students. So what we're here to talk about today is how, with students with different learning styles, not every student's going to be successful if it looks like those rows and those pictures and all of their learning is auditory. And the students are supposed to gain whatever bits of knowledge they can from you, the teacher. I hope your classroom doesn't still look like that, and especially that your students don't look like these kids. But I know that if you're here listening to this, then you're hoping that this is not what you want your classroom to be like in the future, that you know that sitting and learning doesn't usually engage the student's mind. A lot of times we don't fix the heart of the problem, which is that the lessons that we're delivering are not as active and engaging as we need them to be for today's students. So I'm here to help you become a learning designer. I want you to take your job as an educator and become an instructional designer, a designer of learning, and turn knowledge and the standards and the pieces and the topics and the learning that we have to get to our kids and turn them into action. And that's when truly engaged students come to life and participate in the learning process. We talk a lot about student-centered learning. Student-centered learning does engage K-12 students. Does every single piece of the learning process, of the teaching, learning, school process, does it have to be active? Does it have to be student-centered? No, not every single piece. But the more student-centered, the more personalized, the more customized the learning is, and the lessons are, the more likely those students are to retain that knowledge and to feel the ownership of whatever it is that we're trying to teach them. So what does real learning look like in action? We're talking about activating learning. We really want those students to come to life when they're a participant in this learning process. We want the students to be producers of information, to be creators, for the teachers to facilitate the learning across students, to make it more student-centered, not consumers of information. If you haven't heard the producer and consumer concept before, it is something that's talked about in education, that not only students, but teachers, we all should be engaged as learners. The best teachers show their students that they are learners as well. And producers of knowledge and producers of learning and learning quests and active learning lessons are the way that you as teachers can be a part of this active learning process. You can be a producer too. Not only a consumer of the information I'm either giving to you today, or you're getting out of the PD this summer, or the consumer of the instructional plan that you're using in your classroom. You can truly be a producer as well. Learning doesn't have to be passive. In fact, it's much better when it's not. So I want you to think about that consumer and producer dichotomy as we continue with this, as you're creating your lessons, as you're building learning and active learning lessons in your classroom for your students. That passive learning is a struggle. It's a difficult thing. And I definitely want to begin to help you to continue to activate learning for your students. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is active learning today, why we should activate learning for our students, and give you guys those tangible ways to activate learning, since we're talking about it kind of as a conceptual piece at the beginning. So what is active learning, right? Active learning engages the student's mind. Active learning engaged kids are thinking and problem solving and creatively being a part of the learning process, students are engaged when they are creating and active. You know, we talk sometimes about what they're creating and if they're actively engaged. We're going to talk about the levels of engagement in a minute. And there can be engaged students that are just at the compliance level that are not actually participating in the active learning process. So we need to try our best to steer clear of that happening in our classrooms. But we definitely want the participants actively participating in the learning process. So we're talking about this passive versus active dichotomy. When you think about passive learning, and sometimes I show this clip when we're talking about active learning, but think about Ferris Bueller, if you've seen the movie. Maybe you've seen the Ferris Bueller movie and you've seen them, you know, the students there that are drooling, or, I mean, that's a really extreme clip or example of passive learning, but it does get the point across. So if you're interested in showing passive learning, that is not what we want in our classrooms. We don't want to ask the question 12 times and have no students participate in answering that question. So why should we activate learning for our students? Well, the changing nature of the job market and the skills that we need our students to come out of our classes with are very different than schools in the past. We talk a lot about preparing our students to be future ready. We have a list of future ready skills that we want to embed in all their curriculum. They are things like being active communicators, being engaged citizens. Maybe you use the creativity, communication, 4 Cs. Maybe you use the Project 21 future ready skills in your school district. There are plenty of different models you can use, but all of them require soft skills and student-centered skills to be embedded into the learning, that they're not things on the side that if the students can pass all the tests and can show you that they know all the standards, that they're actually prepared for the real world after college. You know, these students really do need to be able to be lifelong learners because of how fast things change in technology, because of the different programs they're going to use. Maybe your students do earn industry certifications, but are they the same programs they're going to be working on by the time they get into the job market, or by the time they're 5 years in from now? No, likely not. Likely they might be using something completely different, or maybe computers are going to be defunct by the time your K-5 students go all the way to their jobs and what their future of the job market is. But as we can't participate in that, we really do need to start to think differently about why we're teaching differently for these students. One of the things that we're talking about is engagement. And the whole series is on engaging students K-12. And you can have 100% engagement with really low-level learning. So if you haven't seen this before, I encourage you to take a look. There are levels of engagement in your classroom. What we really strive for and aim for is that high attention and high commitment to learning. And active learning really does help you get to that level of engagement. There's a lot of students that do things because if they weren't participating, they would get in trouble. There's a lot of compliance going on, but are compliant students truly engaged in the learning process? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Our students really deserve to be prepared for their futures. There's value in producing information, in sharing information with other students, with other classes, with other cultures, versus direct instruction happening in your classroom where the students are passively getting the learning coming at them. Maybe they're catching it, maybe they're not, as it's coming in at them. It's not that consuming learning is bad, but producing is taking the ownership of their learning. It's getting them to buy into it. It's giving them personal agency over their learning. We definitely want to make learning come alive for our students, and that's how we get from that, definitely from that bottom rebellion, you know, their attention's all over the place, they're not committed to the learning process, to that truly engaged student. And we try to help our teachers develop lessons that hit that zone of proximal development, that productive struggle with the content that you are delivering to the students, that your students are actively participating in instead of you just giving it to them. You know, we used to talk about it that the teacher doesn't have to be the Google in the room anymore, correct? That the teacher used to have to know all the knowledge and I get to deliver it to the student, A, B, C, as I see fit. Well, the student has the ability to learn from anywhere now. Learning is everywhere. Google is everywhere. Are they going to participate in the learning, or are they just going to watch it fly by and maybe they grab a piece of it directly on a test and maybe they don't? And we're going to try to get to that level of engagement. So now that we've kind of talked about the why, I want to talk about the how. Sure, that's why you came to listen to this, is how are some ways to truly activate learning? One of the things that really was alarming to me are some of the new stats that have come out that my boss was telling us the other day. You know, 81% of global workers are not engaged in the workplace. That means they're not connected to other learners, which means they're not going to keep growing in their industry, in their field, in their passion, that they don't feel valued and that they're not developed. There's also a statistic that is the longer you stay in school, the less engaged you become. That 76% of students feel engaged in elementary school, but by the time you get to high school, it's only 44% of students, and 61% in middle school. So the longer you stay in school, so you high school teachers that are out there, we want to keep these kids engaged. We don't want to have an engagement gap, right? Gamifying learning, that's a way to activate learning, really encouraging students to participate. One of the myths that I hope to kind of debunk in this is technology does not equal student engagement. Using Canvas doesn't equal student engagement. It's how you use Canvas to really empower students, to engage students in meaningful collaboration and truly engaging, exciting, immersive learning, to have students role play and really participate in the learning process. Maybe they experience the lesson they're supposed to learn instead of listen to someone else do it or watch a movie about it. Maybe they're going to draw those conclusions themselves, that they immerse themselves in project-based learning that you've developed, and they are drawing conclusions about the learning themselves. Science teachers typically are pretty good at this, that they have a lot of experiments so that the student participates in the learning process and they're the ones that are drawing the conclusions. But that no one says that only science teachers have to do this. English teachers can definitely, math teachers can definitely have their students. Social studies, imagine instead of learning about one of the wars that is in your classroom or that's in your content, that's in your standards, maybe the students are playing through a game that they're immersed in the war and they're a part of it. Imagine how much more impactful those students. So we're talking about the how, to give students active learning, to give students voice. Technology itself isn't going to do it. The novelty wears off, but you can truly use Canvas to build immersive learning and use technology tools that are out there like Padlet and Poplet and Google Drive and Office 365 and whatever it is that your school uses to embed inside these Canvas lessons, inside the pages and the modules, to create this active learning process for your students. That being said, we also want to have students have their voice in the learning process. Giving students voice creates active learning. It gives students agency over their learning. It gives them creative choice. It gives them the ability to, maybe you don't get to every student in one single class period or in one day in elementary school, but you get the feedback from all the students because you have them participate in engaging active lessons. So it holds the students accountable to their learning. Students that are able to participate with their voice and having, maybe they get to choose the way that they're showing you what they know. So give some students some choice. If you're hesitant about giving students completely open choice to show what they know, start small. Start with 2 or 3 projects or products that you'll accept in order for them to show you whatever it is. Start with things that you're comfortable with. Maybe you have a student that is a fantastic TV production student and they're really good at making videos. Or maybe they just are really like making YouTube videos with their phones. Because anybody can be a self-YouTuber at this point, right? But those students really can show you even the most boring of topics that you have to cover, or the most or the lesson that you really dread giving because you really don't have an innovative way to do it. But if you give students the way and the choice to show what they know, those students are going to be much more likely to put more effort into whatever it is that they're learning, because maybe they also have to share it with someone else. So that being said, not only embedding those technology tools or giving students some choice and that ownership over their learning, maybe you also want to create an authentic audience for where that goes. So I'm talking pretty fast about these different technology tools. I'm happy to engage with you all after the fact about how to do these kind of things in your Canvas courses or in your class, in the things that you build, but also to brainstorm ideas of some authentic audiences that you can give to your students. Think about yourself for a minute. Think about what are the most engaging, impactful lessons that you as a learner, now out of school and in the education field, that stick with you. What are those sticky learning experiences? I've talked to a lot of teachers and asked them this question in our PDs, and almost all of them tell me about some sort of immersive learning experience. One told me the other day about how they built a rainforest out of their classroom, how they got to choose their topic of this major project, and so they worked with people at the company itself to create something that was really meaningful for the company that they ended up using in their marketing materials. The more we can give a student a creative audience, an authentic audience to work for and work with, they start to do things not only just for you as their teacher, but with a more intrinsically motivated purpose. They're not just going to do a project that is good enough. A lot of times, well, the teacher's only going to look at this part of it. I'm going to make it good enough. But when they have to share what they've done, create with a purpose, have real people to connect with, maybe you just are going to post some of their stuff on a blog that you're going to share with their parents, so their parents get to see all of it. Or maybe some of their family members or community members. Maybe some people at your school district are going to come in and see some of these things that are this authentic learning that's going on. The students are going to try harder. It gives them much more of a purpose and an active learning strategy, so that it's not just good enough for their teacher and then they move on to whatever's next. Let's stop making it some red tape that they have to pass through to get to the next part, and start making it something that's really meaningful for these students. We want these students to have real agency over their learning. Canvas and other technologies and the internet and the way that things are really starting to be so connected really increasingly makes it easy for teachers to share student learning, is to have a real collaborative, engaging conversation with more than just the students you have in your 4 walls of your classroom. Think beyond the 4 walls. Brainstorm maybe some community outreach. Maybe some of your partners that work with your school, maybe some problems that you have in your community or at your school that you could have your students solving so that they really feel like they're participatory in this learning, in the part of the school, and that they're not just complying, and they're out of that level of compliance and into that level of true student engagement. Because we want our students, as they become more future ready, to be those students, to be those people in society that are out there solving more problems than they are creating, that are engaged in their communities, in society, that they will impact the future positively. And whatever that means for each individual student. It could mean that they impact a whole community. It could mean that they impact their home. But it's meaningful for each individual. Another one of the things that we use to activate student learning is thinking differently about this space. So maybe you have a classroom that looks like this, maybe you don't. Most of us don't. Most of us have classrooms that look more like those beginning pictures. But as schools are getting, funds for new furniture to be bought, or maybe you're earning a grant, maybe you're applying for a grant, you can start to use some of this research and information to make schools look more and feel more engaging and flexible to students. So how do we create this kind of flexible space? Well, we definitely want movable furniture. We want the ability for students to collaborate or work individually in small groups or large groups, depending on what the learning is. Some of the blended learning courses that we create, we have some blended courses we've created for our middle schoolers. And on any given day, the classroom can look any way, depending on the lesson. Sometimes they're in a big circle around the room and all the desks are facing the middle. Sometimes there's pods and groups of 3 kids. Sometimes we have the students over at a station where they can project. Sometimes we have the students over there collaborating on a couch or beanbags or small spaces in their classroom. It really does make an impact on kids when they can learn the way that they feel that they learn best. Maybe you want to use it as a motivator. We've seen some classrooms in some of our schools where the students are collaborating or doing learning, participating in learning in the way that they choose. And on Fridays, the group that has gotten the most work done, gotten the highest scores, feel like they're, whatever the carrot is that the teacher decides to dangle for the students, they get to work in the, comfy chairs in the corner. It's amazing how impactful that, the little, I forget what they're called, but they're the little movable chairs, stools that you can order for elementary school classrooms, and the students can fidget, but they can also get their work done. I don't know about you, but if I have to sit in a meeting for 8 hours a day, all day, it's pretty rough. I do like to get up and move around. So think about how your students are feeling, sit in their shoes, and try to create a flexible working environment that's something that you want to work into. One of the most meaningful things I heard about this lately was that, why don't we take some of our leadership and put them in one of our least flexible classrooms that there are out there, and see how long they can stand it without getting up, moving around, and complaining about the chairs. So try to do what you can to create that flexible learning environment for your students to be able to actively learn in the way that your lesson lends itself to best. And that will do, it will begin to really impact your students' learning. I definitely think another thing is thinking beyond those 4 walls of the classroom. So connecting students' learning and giving them an authentic audience. The more that students can share their learning with others, the more, A, as a teacher, you can tell if someone really understands. B, the more impactful that learning is, and the more impactful it can be. One of the ways that we connect student learning is we have them create e-portfolios or digital portfolios. And the students begin this, you can begin in elementary school or you can begin it in middle school. In our case, that's what we do. And then we want, and we have our teachers have students be able to add some of their work examples, some of the things they're really proud of, some things that exhibit who they want to be in the future or their pathway, so that maybe if they're applying for an internship or a magnet program, or one of our programs of emphasis, that they have a body of work that shows, hey, not only am I passionate about this, but I already have been doing things about these things, about these different concepts, and I want to continue my learning in that way. And it connects the students' learning from being able to, you know, talk about it on this one test and get this one answer right. It goes from that to being able to create their own body of work and their own body of knowledge that all starts to integrate and flow together. Thinking beyond the four walls of your classroom, you know, you can use the e-portfolios in Canvas. You can have them creating in Google Docs and in Google Slides and things like that, that are both inward facing for your classroom or outward facing for you to share with your community or with your parents. Teacher websites that post these things to other people are a way that we use that. We definitely, as Canvas being our LMS, we definitely utilize this to connect students' learning, to have the parents come in as observers for the students so that they really can see the learning happening. And, you know, the more people that are involved in the students' learning, the more we can help the students understand that this is their place right now to take ownership of who they are, of who they're becoming, of how they can show that and grow those different things both now and in their future. It's not easy to engage elementary and middle school students in that part of the conversation. It's not even easy to engage ninth grade students in that part of the conversation. As we're looking at career pathways and college pathways for our high school students, the more connected they are to applying to college and to getting out of school, the more impactful they think this part of the process is. But the truth is, they really need to start it early these days, because a lot of colleges, a lot of jobs, a lot of employers are looking at who the student is and their digital footprint and their learning progress. And they're not just looking at the one snapshot of the student resume. I know I got to hire some interns recently, and I looked at their social media and I said, is this someone that I want representing my company and representing ePathways and who we are as an organization? And if they had questionable things, I know I certainly didn't call them in for an interview. And I know that that's how we've talked to some of our community members, and that's definitely how they're going as well. So connecting that student's learning beyond the four walls of your classroom is something that's really going to truly create more active learning for your students. We definitely want to talk about how students can talk with people and not have the people talk at them. Engaged students truly are connecting with outside individuals and not solely being listeners and not solely being the people presenting either. It really is that two-way connection of conversation. And one of the things that really helps that come to life for students, I'm sure we all have discussed social media. So let's see how social media turns into this activating learning process. Think about the evolution of social media. Our students, this is all that they know now. They don't know the world without social media being a part of it. So how do we, as educators, embrace social media to create this active learning process? I've heard stories of teachers reaching out to authors of the books that the students are reading to create two-way conversation and dialogue with these authors that love to come talk to students in the classrooms. I did that in college. I had one of my favorite writers came into my college classroom, and I think it was one of the most impactful, engaged learning experiences that I had in college, because this author, I believe it was Michael Connolly, came into my journalism class. But the way that the teachers can get those authors and those famous people and those people that are workers in these different fields that you're learning about, that your students are learning about, is through social media. So I encourage you to have an online presence, have a Twitter, that you're engaged in social media yourself, so you can both practice the way that we want our students participating in social media and get your students engaged in that part of the learning process. I think that the social media thing is a really important way to engage students. I think that as social media and this becoming the way of life and having a LinkedIn profile for their futures becomes more and more prevalent in society and becomes more important as students, enter the college and career workforce, I think it's more and more important for us to be up on that stuff too as educators. I think in order to engage students in the active learning process, meeting them where they are is a critical component to that. So we've talked about connecting students, we've talked about social media, we've talked about creating an authentic audience, giving students voice. I've got a couple quick things that if you have this going on in your school, it definitely is examples of active learning. Sure, we've all heard about the maker movement by this point. If you haven't, I definitely encourage you to start thinking about maker spaces, thinking about how creating, being active learners, being creators of knowledge and producers of knowledge instead of consumers of knowledge can be done in a maker space. Everyone can be a maker and a creator. Does it have to be something that they do every day? No, but is it something that really can be impactful in their learning process? Absolutely. There's a lot of great research out there about the maker movement. I encourage you to get involved in your local community. I know we have a great maker fair going on here in Orlando. I know there's great ones spread out across the nation. If you haven't been a part of this and you don't think this has a space in your school, I encourage you to prove that wrong, because it really does activate learning for students and give them a meaningful way to participate in the learning process. Another thing that is very, coming about, or maybe your schools have them, maybe some of your schools that you wish they had them, are 3D printers. But 3D printers for novelty's sake, because they're new, is not going to do anything to activate learning for your classroom. It's just going to create you all watching and your students watching this printer that instead of printing on a page like it used to, is now printing in 3D, a template that you've pulled off the internet. That's not going to activate learning for your students. What is the design process of prototyping, is having students participate in the engineering design process where they're going through iterating and iterations of their products and showing their creativity, creating things that, that don't exist yet, maybe customizing things to the specific needs of your classroom. That's the way that it really activates learning for your students, is really involving that engineering design process, creating tangible products, which also means that students are participating in 3D design, or at least taking 3D designs and manipulating them to be what you want them to be, not just printing out the keychains or the templates that come with your 3D printer. I've seen one too many 3D printers being used in that way. So I encourage you, if you're looking into 3D printing for activating learning for your students, to do it in a much more meaningful way where the students are really problem solving or design thinking or systems thinking, to strategically use this 3D printer to prototype and get better and better iterations of a product, or to customize and create things that don't exist. In order to activate learning for your students. Wearables can definitely activate learning. If you've looked at the different things that are out there, starting to go in the more virtual reality realm, utilizing Fitbits or Apple Watches or different pieces of wearable technology. It definitely doesn't have to be the more high-end stuff in schools. I know we're all struggling for money. But the wearable technology can really activate learning for your students. So that really does have an impact, and it's only growing. The market is really only growing with this. It's not going away. And I know that it's part of marketing and people wanting to buy, you know, and activate all the different parts of your body, but the way that it really can be impactful in the learning process is there. And virtual reality and augmented reality, which is where that is right now, augmented reality really does start to give students a more engaged feel in some of this learning. And I can guarantee you that augmented reality and virtual reality isn't going away. It's only going to continue into our futures. You know, I've heard some futurists talk at some different conferences. And first of all, I love that term, futurist. I would like to be a futurist. And I do try to, you know, figure out where we're going so that our schools can even remotely keep up, because I don't want our students learning for the past. I want them learning for tomorrow and for the future. But that augmented reality and everything being smart and interactive is growing and growing and growing the more that technology is becoming less expensive and more invasive and intrusive. So whether you see that as positive or negative, it is something that our students are going to need to be aware of and be comfortable with and accustomed to as they go into their future careers. So how do I design active learning to keep our students fully engaged? How do we make this change? I've given you some examples. We've talked about some different examples. Giving students creative choice, any opportunity you can to have your students be creative, can really start to make a difference. If you're worried about it, start small. Start with 1 or 2 things. But you can also go out there and go big and let your students show you different things, create different things, participate in different things, choose something they're passionate about for whatever it is that the learning you want them to do, that they have to do. As a result of the knowledge that they've gained, right? Would you prefer to do this or this? How do you want to demonstrate your understanding? Let's reconsider what we're asking our students to produce. Are we asking them to regurgitate the information in 16 of the same diorama or 30 of the exact same project and product? Or are we allowing them to be active learners in the process? So it's a different way of thinking, and I hope that you're interested in thinking differently about how you create your lessons so that the students really do have some of that voice, ownership, choice, etc. So our time's coming to a close, but speaking of time, this is the major example that all teachers give me, that I say as well, about why we don't create more active, engaging lessons for our students. Yes, time is short. We have too many things to squeeze into our day. There is no time. We don't have time to plan. All of these things are absolutely true. I'm right there with you. I understand. But really, for our students, there's no time to wait, because their future is going to come and it's going to be ahead of them, regardless of if we change our practices or not. So let's all do a little bit, and it will make a big impact on them. And that's why we do this. We do this for our students. We do this for the kids. We want you to be a learning designer. I encourage you to design exciting, engaging, immersive learning and really activate learning for your students and help them be future ready. Albert Einstein said best, right? Play is the highest form of research. Make them play and accidentally learn along the way. Have them participate in classrooms that look like this and that don't look like those ones that I showed you at first. And don't be afraid to let your students play and activate learning for them. This might be the way that you came to see this session. This is just a little snapshot of the 3 different webinars that we have going on here in June in the Engage K-12 session. The first one today being on activating learning and giving you guys hopefully some helpful tips on how to activate learning for your students. And maybe if you are participating or if you are sharing this information with others, maybe some ways that you can overcome the why would we need to do this? Why can't we just do it the way that we've always done it? And sharing that information with some of those people. The next one's on using project-based learning to engage students, true project-based, student-centered learning and not projects for project's sake. And the third one is how to create student-centered learning quests for using Mastery Pass or using Canvas in general for your students to participate in. So really creating that student-centered learning. So I encourage you to sign up for one of these coming up in June. And I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that are coming in the live chat. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Nicolina. We do have a question that came up in the chat from Kevin O'Brien. Have you, in support of your of the philosophy here that you're sharing, have you explored mastery paths in Canvas, and how does that affect or enhance or support this?
Yeah, I have explored mastery paths, and I'm continuing to do it more and more as we're building more blended and online learning for our students for next year. One of the things that I've really liked about it is sort of giving them that more personalized learning approach where it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? The word I'm looking for is, well, for lack of a better word, for more about learning mastery. I was trying not to use the word in the definition, but where students are actually, you know, showing what they know in regard to meeting whatever standard or learning topic that you have in there, and then being able to kind of choose their own adventure in order to gain the rest of that knowledge. So we have it set up in various ways that maybe some students are along that traditional pathway, but students really are able to more customize their pathway based on their choice, based on their passion, or based on what things they've mastered or not up to this point.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. There doesn't seem to be any more questions in the chat yet, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to post them there. And we are also excited to see kind of how this series sort of evolves and rounds out and kind of creates a nice 3-episode package for everyone to kind of consume. We're excited about that. If you do have follow-up questions or want to interact with Nicolina even further, you know, you can always find her in the community. You can post the questions below the event page where she can follow up with you there as well.
And my hashtag on Twitter is @NicolinaC. My name is NiCholinaC. And you're happy to engage with me on Twitter, and I'll get back to you instantly.
Another question that came in from the chat room: can technology distract students from learning? How to balance that?
Yeah, yes, it can if used ineffectively. If you have your students, I like to use the analogy that, you know, the more classroom management that you have with technology or without technology is about the same kind of classroom management that you can have with technology. The novelty wears off for students pretty fast. Give your students an iPad or a computer. They use this stuff all the time. This is a part of who they are and a part of their lifestyle. Even our students that, you know, might not be at the high SES kind of range, they still, the novelty wears off pretty fast. It's how you create the lessons to really engage the students. The more engaging and excited the students are about what comes next in the lesson, about what they're learning about things that they're passionate about, the less distracting the technology becomes, and the more it's able to enhance the whole learning and teaching process. So sometimes you also want to use those little tricks and tips that you have as a teacher, like sometimes I use in collaborative docs how I can see everything and use a time slider, and how I can see everything that's ever been typed on the doc, and it scares the kids because I can see everything that's ever been typed in the doc, even though even though they have deleted it. It never deletes completely and entirely, and that's a great lesson for them to learn. And you know, you do kind of want to set those things up in the beginning once you're using technology in your classroom, but I've found that it enhances the learning process much, much more than it ever distracts from it. So if you're using those kind of strategies to help your students get acquainted with it at first, you can kind of nip those in the bud from the beginning. So thank you.
Great. Sounds great. Any other questions? For those of you who are currently on this on the YouTube channel watching this, if you note the URL, it will be the exact same URL after we finish the recording, so it won't change. So you can always go back to this YouTube URL to review the session and share the session as well. Thank you so much, Nicolina, for being here. We look forward to seeing you again next week, same time, same place, and we will continue the session from there. Everyone, thank you so much for being here as well, and we look forward to seeing you in a future Canvas Live session.